Next, I want to turn to the topic we've had multiple discussions about, and you all have been patient as we have tried to maneuver through the latest with the Hall of Fame Village project relative to the resolution to allow there to be TIFs, kind of allowed already, but creating the structure for the TIF the TIF financing. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for. So, as you last recall, the conversation we had was about ensuring that this school district's fee simple interest in the land, as well as its usage rights, will be protected and maintained as this TIF structure was put together. The board gave pretty clear direction, and we were clear that our goal was to make sure that structure would hold up, where there would be no jeopardizing our fee simple or usage rights. We won't go through the dirty details of all the work that has gone into this, but let me just high level and say it has been a very, as always, it seems with this project, complicated, tedious task of corralling everyone to getting on the same page. But ultimately, we have done that. We've done that in a way that is consistent with Ohio, what has been held up, has been done before in the county, has been held up much thanks to our county officials here, our county auditor. Is that correct? Was that the auditor who helped with that structure?
The auditor helped with the structure. And let me maybe go sideways from there a little bit. I want to sort of, when we were last together, we were talking about coming up with a structure that would sort of split the tax parcels. And I'm sure I knew Rich would remember vividly the conversation. So we talked about trying to split the tax parcels in a way that would sort of separate the fee from the leasehold improvements and the lease and the improvements that are owned and leased by the Port Authority and or the Hall of Fame Village. And we ran that to the ground. I am still 100% convinced it works and probably works best for this property. But at the end of the day, the purchaser and its counsel, the bond purchaser, the financing person,
talking about the purchaser of the TIF bonds.
The TIF bonds came back and said, because it's unusual, and we already have complicated real estate structure, they were not comfortable with the structure. And so where we ended up is we reverted all the way back to, I think, what I had originally suggested we should be doing many months ago. That was in response. That structure was our response to them being unwilling to go with a structure where the tax lien would only relate to the taxes, and where the liens that secure the bond payments, as distinguished from the taxes, would all relate to Hall of Fame Village, to the lessee. And that's where we came back to. We have a structure now where we have a declaration, and that's the question in front of you today. We want to attach a declaration to our property. Also to the property generally, but it includes the fee simple interest of the school district. The declaration, though, only relates to the taxes and the in lieu of payments, the direct payments. Today, as we sit here, the stadium is subject to tax. The value was just was released last week, and the value of the stadium, according to the county auditor, is $40 million. The value of the youth fields property, according to the county auditor, is $7 million. If nothing else happened right now, taxes would be due on that. The TIF financing that the city put in place, they put in place the building blocks for it with our agreement back in 2015. The TIF essentially turns some of those payments into non-tax, in lieu of payments, non-tax pilots that can then be used to support bonds and thereby leverage money, from the incremental tax benefit of the development in order to pay for public infrastructure, in order to pay for like the Harrison Road improvements and things like that. And that's what, that's where we are. The declaration, and I want to come back to a couple of things that we were able to really build in to the declaration that are highly protective of the school district. But we, in order to provide notice to all parties, in order to provide, security for a bond structure like this, we need to put a declaration on our property. And the key point was to make sure that we were not increasing our liability. We were not changing our liability from what it is today, through this process. And at the same time, we preserve against any lien foreclosures, preserve the rights to the use of the stadium, and preserve the ability to protect against any kind of lien foreclosure.
Okay. So we're protecting this stuff, and that's good. How is it that isn't in the original, when the TIF was, when the resolution was passed in 2015, and then when the subsequent TIF was passed in, I want to say 16?
It's 15. It was all
15. How is it that this stuff isn't in there from that?
A lot of it is. And I think but what we were addressing at that time was not the financing side. There was no financing in place at that time. What we were addressing was compensation to the school district for agreeing to this structure. And we essentially kicked down the road because it would not have gotten done if we hadn't kicked down the road the exact financing structure. And this financing structure will be in place across Hall of Fame Village. This is not specific to, this deal right now is specific to property that the school district has fee simple interest in. But the key pieces for the TIF financing and the key pieces for the compensation to the school district are, they relate to the hotel, the performance center, everything else that is kind of off of our property. And there's no way to predict. We didn't even know who the owners of that property are going to be. That property didn't exist in the city of Canton at the time for the most part. It was in Plain Township and in Plain local school district. And so,
are you saying we'd have to revisit it at that time, or anything that came on would have to go underneath this?
Here's, not underneath, but it'll be side by side. I guess the way I would say it. There's three pieces of property that you own that are subject to this regime. You've got the stadium itself, you've got the youth fields, Scott Field to the south, and you've got the parking area to the west, the student lot, all of which are ground leased for the 100-year period, 99-year period. Those are all intended to be part of the TIF. You don't do a TIF financing until you have improvements to the property, until you have a basis for determining what the increased value is, because what you are leveraging is only the incremental value. It's not, the base value continues to pay tax, just like it always has. And so, sure.
You talk about improvements, and you touched on it earlier. I know some of the public infrastructure improvements, aren't they going to have to put that money up in escrow? Yeah, IRG.
They essentially.
That's between the city and IRG.
Between the
but-
city and IRG, IRG has already paid for almost everything here. They've already essentially put, they've built the roadways, they've built most of the improvements that are going into this part of the deal. So this is really designed to, at some level, reimburse them for costs that they have, in a sense, advanced to the city for public infrastructure improvements that will be dedicated to the city.
What safeguards are built in if they get into there and find a 90-year-old gas main or things like that? There's got to be some safeguards built in.
They've already done it. I mean,
They've done all that.
they've already built everything that is being financed here. There's a couple of questions that are still, that the city and IRG I know are still working through. One, the dedication question that's supposed to be resolved on Monday. I think when the key engineering department person is back on Monday. This transaction is currently scheduled to close Wednesday of next week, the 27th. Other questions while we're here?
Do we need to vote on it before then?
Yes.
Has the city signed off on this? I know they have been tied into discussions with this. Has the law department given their green light to this?
The law department has given its green light. Subject to final determination on the actual costs that they will, just really a city function. I mean, we are just a property owner here. I mean, that's, I think, a key point. We have an interest in making sure that in enabling this to go forward, because if this doesn't go forward, the TIF itself will probably not really go into effect, and we won't get our compensation, right? I mean, we get compensation as each piece of this is built. We have an interest in payments that derive from the future portions of these properties, and we also have an interest in making sure that that our tenant at this point on the stadium is able to utilize the stadium and hold events and make money, so that they actually pay, the taxes that are due. I mean, we do. I mean, if it stayed as taxes, we would get the lion's share of that. But at some point, somebody has to be able to pay it, or it will sort of devolve back into, something where we would have to probably step in at some point. And it's, we have worked really hard, I think, on the aspects of this that relate to the REA, which is your reciprocal easement and use. These are your use rights. We have built in essentially backstop provisions into the declaration that we are going to attach to the ground, so that even in the event that there's a full breakdown in this structure at some point, your use rights are protected. If there is a full breakdown, you always have the right to step in. As it sits today, if the taxes are a lien on the property, and if they're unpaid, then we have the right to step in, make advances, hold them responsible, kick them out, and figure out how to move on, and sort of go back, get our governmental exemption, the things we've talked about before in terms of an exit strategy. Those things are all still available, and still you need to still keep those in mind in the back of your mind. I mean, in the interest of full disclosure, I mean, there is the risk that this thing does not fully succeed, and that's always in my mind in terms of how I'm thinking about what are your rights on at any step, and because the security for a TIF bond is fundamentally the tax lien, which primes any leases, right? I mean, you can't, if there is a tax lien foreclosure, leases go away, and so that is, we are convinced, and I think I think all council in the group are convinced that the REA and use rights do not go away. Like, that stays with the land even after a tax lien foreclosure. But, and that gets you most of what you want. I mean, right, that gets you most of what you need for the next 96 years. But we have backstopped that in ways through the declaration to make it clear that even if we're wrong about that question, which we don't think we are, the declaration protects you in a couple of different ways on those use rights. And then I think on the fee, as I said, we've said before, the key point on the fee has always been that the taxes are the taxes, they have to be paid. The tax lien follows that. What we refused to agree to was to tie the obligations that are secured by the tax lien to the bonds themselves in any way. It only relates to, the actual taxes that would be due anyway.
So all this movement would tell me that Plain Local School District dropped their
Yes. It was-
objection to the value of the statement?
They did for now. I think that they, I would guess, we are, as part of that agreement, we and they are agreeing not to challenge the valuation that exists essentially today. The auditor said it's 40 million. We're agreeing that we won't challenge it to reduce it. But nobody's agreed that we wouldn't challenge it to increase it. My working assumption is that they will. And I don't know whether they'll, if I were them, I would wait a couple of years until you have real revenue coming off the stadium so you have some basis for arguing there are new facts, to the auditor.
Is that why it was valued at what it was valued? Because it cost $170 million to build.
I don't know what it cost, but yes, it cost a lot more than 40.
Yeah. So is that part of that equation?
Absolutely, yes, it is. And I know that the auditor has spent a lot of time and effort, and I know he got a lot of pressure to at least, I think the actual bond issue we're doing, I think, has dropped to about 10 million, a little over 10 million from 11.5. The reason it dropped to 10 million from 11.5 was because the auditor came back at 40 million instead of 45 million. And, that was what the purchaser and the developer were essentially arguing to him for. But he said, no, they wanted 45.
They wanted 45.
Because that would have allowed them to leverage an extra $1.5 million off of the TIF bonds. And he refused. He said, I believe, to the extent I can tell, I believe it's, really more like 40 million. We can always revisit it, later if the facts warrant. I think that's putting words in his mouth, but it wasn't that, but that's essentially it.
So in 3 years, that would be assessed again.
It will.
What happens then?
Yeah, I don't know what is your sexennial, triennial, and start.
Whatever it is.
Whatever it is, you've got clearly whenever the sexennial is, there will be a new look. In between now and then, any school district can challenge the value. And as I said, my working assumption is that there will be a challenge to try to increase it. I think, for this board, I'll just leave you with this. I guess my view is you have mixed view of that. I think my view is you do. If the value is increased substantially, you have a stake in that. You will get, as long as payments are being made, you will get a piece of all those payments. On the other hand, you do want to make sure that the tenant can keep paying. So you want it to be successful. And you also want to take into account the fact that in a full breakdown scenario, you may have to step in, and at least for the short term, those obligations would be the school districts while you work through your exit strategy. So that's, I think, the way I would think about it if I was this board. And maybe you just don't take any position at all, because and let the facts sort of play out.
When do we vote?
Yeah, so we have a resolution here, so a couple questions. One, is that ready to go?
It is.
So now it's the board's discretion in terms of, today, we need to, or not, we need to call another special meeting because there's a tight timeline. So,
Well, I can tell you, and I'll speak for myself, whether I'm the president or not, there is no chance we're voting on that tonight. We're going to have the ability to at least have some conversation and to look at it and make sure, and that's not a reflection on you.
Understood.
But it just seems to be a recurring theme that everything's last minute. And it just concerns me that we just can't do this as a district on the fly like this. We've got to do our diligence just like we did through the estoppel. You know, we cookie cuttered it and did that, and that's my approach on this, to where we can have a discussion about when can we get back together and do a quick meeting, but, you know, I'm gonna have to be able to, you know, take my time to look through that and make sure it is where it's at, and no reflection on you, Jeff. It's just,
JR,
you're getting the document for them, and it seems to be the reoccurring thing that just concerns me, that we've got to have time to vet that.
Which is, and I will just tell you that they think that we're, how do I say this?
They're not
Did I read
elected,
said to
we
me?
are.
No, I understand. I'm just,
Right.
and I've got copies of both. There's two declarations, one for Scott Field and one for
And I say, all right,
for the stadium.
that's not my.
Understood.
Yeah, it's IRG.
But I know that counsel to the purchaser and IRG have essentially said to me that, you know, we're the only people who are getting any benefit from the declaration at this point, from what we're putting on our ground, because we're getting the REA, we're specifically limiting our liability in any number of ways. And it includes, like, even if we were to, you know, end up taking the property back, it's all subject to available funds, appropriation of funds. I mean, this school district has no personal liability on any of it. But, you know, are there risks that we're addressing in that document? Yes. And I'm happy I brought enough copies for everybody to, you know, sit and take one, if that's what you want. I also brought a copy of the resolution. It is my typical resolution, which lays out.
Boilerplate?
What? No, it's it's 3 pages of recitals about what it is we're talking about and why we're talking about it and agreeing to it and why it is in the best interest of the school district to proceed.
so my question is, so what's our deadline? Somebody mentioned the 27th. You mentioned 27th.
The closing is the 27th as of right now. It could slide as far as the 28th, although I would not recommend that we, unless we are in a bad position, wouldn't recommend we be the party to sort of have it pushed back to the 28th, because it is the 30th is the absolute deadline. That's a Saturday.
It's us. Who else has to speak on IRG?
It's, you know, there's a cooperative agreement that has 8 parties to it, I believe, and we're not one of them. You know, it's everybody in the world. And, you know, on these particular declarations, it's Hall of Fame, school district, Stark Court. Those are the 3 principal signers of the declaration, because those are the 3 parties who have interests that sit above the ground lease. We are joined by Hall of Fame Village, the developer, and and the entities that sit on the property, so Hall of Fame Village Stadium. You know. We are also joined on the declarations as to the minimum value covenant by Plain Local. And so they're on it. And then there's a cooperative agreement that addresses the more general issues relating to the bonds. That we are not a party to. We have some ability to influence it, and I've gotten, my comments, I think, are all essentially have been addressed on that agreement. We have some ability to address issues like, does it adequately address the school compensation issues? Because that agreement is typically used to implement the compensation agreement, which, you know, so the way it addresses compensation is that the city is responsible to make the payments to the schools. So it'll end up, you know, so what happens with the service payments is they all go to the city. The city then pays the school. The school then pays the city. So it makes, it'll end up, you know, so what happens with the service payments is they all go to the city. The city then pays the school. 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 The city then pays the school The city then will pay Canton City Schools 2/3 of the 25%. It'll pay Plain Local 1/3 of the 25%. And then the 75% will go to essentially support the bonds. It'll go to a trustee to support the bonds, but that all sits at the city. And so that's, to me, that's the best way to handle this. I mean, you don't run it. The other way would be to run it through a trustee, but you don't want, I mean, my preference is you deal with it at the city. You can always walk in and talk to the city.
So timeline, yeah, basically the rest of this, so basically you have this week.
When are you at Virginia?
Thursday? Work for you guys? That'll give us a
This
couple days.
Thursday?
Yes.
We're getting the benefit, it'll be a fun read.
Yeah, it's the 21st.
Yeah.
So depending on time for me, otherwise you guys can go without me. Just depends on the time. So if we do 4:30 or something.
4:30.
Mhm.
That okay?
4:30 on the 21st?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
That'll give us all a couple days to review this.
Someone's got to
make sure.
send out that in the
Wow.
absence of
I'd
Jim.
have to double check, I might be,
But that also gives us time that if there's anything that may not be appealing, that you say gives us time.
I might need it a little bit later than that, depending if I have to close that be till 5:30, so just time-wise. But I can let you guys know as soon as I get home.
So the time are we looking for on Thursday?
So so I will find out from Mark if he can do 4:30, if not tonight. If not, then we'll need to go to 5:30.
Yep.
And
Okay.
that'll be tight for me, but I'll make it work.
Great.
Okay. I will see you again on Thursday. Unless you don't want to talk, but
Yeah.
it's up to you. I'll leave you these. Okay, you can deal with them how you wish. And these are substantively identical. You do not need to read both of them. I will leave you copies of both of them. There's one for Stadium and one for Scott Field. There are some minor factual distinctions between property interests and rights in the two properties, but there are no substantive distinctions as to how these things work. Thank you.
Great.
Thank
Thank you.
you, gentlemen.
Thank you, sir.